Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world that might look familiar from paintings and dusty museum dioramas, but smellier, stickier, and far less polished than you imagine. You're walking down a narrow street in a bustling old town. The cobblestones slick with something you probably shouldn't touch, market stalls spilling over with strange goods, and the air a mixture of roasting meat, chimney smoke, and a hint of something rank. People brush past you, their wool tunics worn and damp hair unwashed for weeks, and you can't help but notice this place is not exactly a hygiene paradise. In fact, you probably won't survive this without catching something you don't even have a name for. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here in the middle of the past, and the first thing you notice is that no one seems to have soap in their hands. Not the kind you're used to, anyway. A woman scrubs a copper pot with sand and ash, her fingers rough and cracked, the smell of last night's stew still clinging to the metal. Children dart barefoot through the puddles left from last night's rain, except they're not all rain, and you try not to think about the squelching sound under your own boots. Clean water is a luxury carried in heavy buckets from a distant well, and it's used sparingly. People wash their faces in the morning, maybe their hands before a meal, but full body washing. That's rare. In medieval towns, public bathhouses once thrived until disease and moral suspicion shut many of them down. Earlier in Roman times, people soaked in elaborate public baths, perfumed with oils, their skin scraped clean with bronze strigiles. But those days are long gone here. Now most people settle for what's called a dry wash, changing into a fresh shift or shirt instead of actually bathing. They believe linen wicks away dirt and sweat, so if the garment feels fresh, so must the body. You can almost feel the scratchy fabric against your skin, its stiffness the only sign it's been laundered. The smells around you are layered like an orchestra of human existence, wood smoke and meat ale and damp earth, but under it all, the sharp note of unwashed bodies. People don't find it offensive. It's just part of life. In fact, the idea of smelling like nothing at all might seem unnatural to them. Wealthy folks mask odors with rose water or spices, their gloves scented their hair, dusted with fragrant powders. You catch the faint sweetness as a merchant's wife passes by her gown sweeping the ground. But even she isn't what you'd call clean by your standards. Step inside a modest home, and the sense of hygiene changes again. The rushes on the floor, long grasses strewn to soften the dirt or wood beneath, are months old, hiding scraps of food hair and the occasional insect. They're topped with fresh herbs to sweeten the air, though you still catch the sourness of the layer below. Hands are wiped on aprons, mouths on sleeves, and any scraps from dinner are tossed to the dogs, the floor, or the pigs in the yard. You notice that everyone's teeth are surprisingly intact, though stained. Tooth care exists here, but it's improvised twigs chewed into frayed brushes, cloth rubbed with salt or even charcoal powder to scrub away residue. It's not the minty freshness you know, but it's something. And unlike you, they don't eat refined sugar every day, so tooth decay is less rampant than you expect, though. When it strikes, there's no dentist to save you. Out in the fields, far from the crowded streets, hygiene is even more pragmatic. A farmhand wipes sweat from his brow with a forearm caked in soil, then takes a swig from a leather flask. His work clothes haven't been washed in weeks, but the fresh air and distance from the town make the smells less oppressive. He'll bathe in the river come summer, but in winter he'll settle for splashing his face with icy water and rubbing himself briskly with a cloth. And yet despite the grime, people survive not without sickness, but not in constant collapse either. Their immune systems adapt their expectations, adjust, and their sense of clean is rooted more in visible dirt than in the invisible microbes you know today. You think about how strange it must be to live without knowing what a germ is, to wash purely for comfort or ritual, not for science. As the sun dips lower, the town's smells shift again. Fires are lit, and the scent of roasting meat mingles with boiling cabbage. Somewhere nearby, someone empties a chamber pot into the gutter, the liquid streaming toward the central drain. You step carefully. Hygiene here isn't a single act. It's an ongoing dance with resources, beliefs, and habits that shape how people live and how they see themselves. And tonight, you're going to walk through centuries of that story, one step at a time, until you understand just how hygienic or not people really were. You linger in that narrow street as the last streaks of daylight fade and the flicker of oil lamps begins to guide your way. The glow is warm, almost inviting, but the shadows it casts make the alleys seem narrower, the grime thicker. In the dim light, you can see the faint shimmer of moisture along the gutter, the town's drainage system in action, if you can call it that. You catch the sound of a wooden shutter swinging open above you, a slosh of liquid, and a voice calling something you don't understand. It's the universal warning to look out, but you've already stepped back. The waste splashes onto the cobbles with a wet slap and trickles down toward the center of town. This too is hygiene in the past, not the absence of it, but the management of it in ways that make sense only when resources are scarce and plumbing is centuries away. Waste disposal is one of the great balancing acts of history. In ancient cities like Mohenjo-Daro, thousands of years before this street you're standing in now, there were covered drains and even rudimentary toilets. But those systems collapsed with the civilizations that built them, and the know-how didn't always pass down. By the Middle Ages in Europe, most towns relied on open gutters, cesspits, or simply tossing waste far enough from the door. In larger cities, the wealthiest households might have a garderobe, a wooden seat over a vertical shaft that emptied into a pit or the moat. It kept the smell mostly out of the living quarters, but when the pit filled, someone had to shovel it clean. Imagine being the one who drew that job. The bathhouse you'd have found a century or two earlier has either been shuttered or transformed into something far more questionable. Once these places were where you'd go not only to soak and steam, but also to socialize, conduct business, or even eat. The Romans perfected the art, tepidariums, caldariums, frigidariums, each a different temperature, each part of a ritual. But somewhere along the way in much of Europe, public bathing became suspect. During outbreaks of plague, officials warned that the heat and moisture opened your pores, letting in bad air, the miasma they thought carried disease. Bathhouses also developed a reputation for moral looseness, and when church authorities and civic leaders cracked down, the culture of regular public bathing began to fade. Instead, you see here the rise of what might be called spot cleaning. People wash the parts of the body most exposed to dirt, or most likely to cause offense, the hands, the face, the neck. A bowl of water sits near the hearth, and in the morning each family member splashes their face before beginning the day. Some households keep a communal towel, its dampness, and smell a record of everyone who used it before you. For hair combing is more important than washing. Lice are a constant companion, and combing is a daily ritual. You can feel the fine wooden teeth tugging through strands, pulling away the tiny invaders. In wealthier homes, you might encounter scented waters for rinsing the hands before a meal. Guests would be offered this as a courtesy, sometimes poured from a silver ewer into a basin. The scent lavender, rosemary, or rose was not just pleasant, but thought to protect against illness. Smell, after all, was believed to be tied directly to health. If something stank, it must be dangerous. If it smelled sweet, it was probably safe. You can almost sense the false reassurance it gave knowing what you know now about invisible bacteria and viruses. Clothing serves as another kind of hygiene tool. People change their underlayers, the linen shirt or chemise worn closest to the skin, more often than their outer garments. Linen is easier to wash than wool, and because it wicks moisture away, it's believed to keep the body clean. A freshly laundered shirt can make someone feel newly washed without ever touching water. Laundry itself is no small feat. Clothes are boiled in lye or beaten in streams, scrubbed with ash soap until the fibers soften and fade. The smell of wood ash and sun-dried fabric is one of the cleaner scents in your day here. But cleanliness is not just about the body or clothing, it's also about the home. In the cramped quarters of a city dwelling, air circulation is poor, and smoke from the hearth hangs in the rafters. Windows are small glass, rare. Instead of fresh air, people rely on herbs, incense, or even simply enduring the smells. Floors are swept with brooms made of twigs, but the sweeping often just redistributes the dust. And yet, there's pride in a neat home. Dirt is part of life, but disorder is shameful. You notice that even the poorest homes arrange their possessions with care, folding blankets, hanging tools where they can be reached. If you venture farther afield into the countryside, hygiene takes on an even more seasonal rhythm. Summer means more water, more bathing in streams or ponds. Winter makes such luxuries dangerous. The shock of cold water can kill. In the cold months, people wash less airing bedding when the weather allows, using smoke from the hearth to dry and purify clothing. Ashes from the fire are rubbed on cooking pots to scrub away grease the same way ancient peoples used sand. You're beginning to see that hygiene in the past is not a single fixed standard, but an adaptation shaped by climate technology and belief. And as you stand there watching a girl refill her family's bucket from the town well, you realize something else: water is heavy. Each trip means hauling more than 30 pounds from the pump to the home. Every drop has to be used with intention. Washing for pleasure, as you might in a hot shower, is not part of the calculation. You start to understand why the smell of people, animals, wood smoke, and food is simply the baseline of life here. It's not neglect, it's survival. The street is quieter now, the lamps casting long shadows, the smell of cooking fading into the sharper scents of smoke and damp. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere else a child laughs. The world you're walking through is not sterile, not by any measure you know, but it's alive, and in its own way it's clean enough to keep life going. You move on from the narrow lanes and step into the outskirts where the air feels lighter, but still carries the unmistakable scent of animals and earth. Here in the open space beyond the market and the clustered houses, hygiene takes on a new dimension, one shaped by the close partnership between humans and the creatures they depend on. Cows, sheep, goats, and pigs wander in and out of enclosures, their droppings dotting the ground in familiar patterns. No one here seems to flinch. Manure is part of the cycle of life. It will be shoveled into heaps, left to rot, and later spread on the fields to feed the soil. It smells pungent now, but to these people that smell is the promise of next season's harvest. You see a boy carrying a pail of water to a pen of geese. His hands are dirty, his feet bare, his face streaked with mud. In the modern world, you might insist he wash before eating or touching anything else, but here that's not the rule. Dirt is not an enemy, it's simply the environment. The idea that microscopic organisms could cause disease won't be understood for centuries. Illness is blamed on bad air curses or divine displeasure, not on the invisible bacteria clinging to hands and food. Yet that doesn't mean there are no rules about cleanliness. They just look different from the ones you know. In many rural communities, the hearth is kept swept and the cooking pots are cleaned as well as possible after each use. Bread ovens are scraped and brushed before the next batch is slid inside. Dairy tools, churns, strainers. Buckets are rinsed thoroughly because even without knowing why, people have learned that milk spoils faster if the tools aren't clean. You notice how practical this kind of hygiene by habit can be even without scientific reasoning behind it. Personal grooming here is also tied to necessity more than vanity. Hair is combed daily, partly to keep it tidy, but mainly to keep lice under control. Women's long hair is braided or pinned up to keep it from tangling and to avoid catching it on tools or in the fire. Beards are trimmed or shaved with simple knives, though for many men a full beard is simply left to grow. You hear the rhythmic scrape of a blade against stubble, the soft sound of spit being used to wet the skin before the cut. Soap, if used at all, is harsh and homemade from animal fat, and ash more suited to laundry than to skin. Seasonal festivals bring their own bursts of washing and dressing up. Before major holy days, people make the effort to change into cleaner clothes, sometimes even bathing in rivers or ponds despite the cold. This ritual cleansing is as much about presenting oneself properly before God and community as it is about removing dirt. You imagine the shock of stepping into icy water on a spring morning, the gasp it would draw from your lungs, and the rush of circulation that would follow. In wealthier households, you begin to notice a subtle but telling difference. Servants are tasked with maintaining certain standards of appearance for their masters. Garments are brushed free of dust, hair is perfumed, and hands are washed more regularly, especially if guests are expected. It's not that the wealthy are dramatically cleaner, it's that they have the labor of others to make it appear so. That illusion of constant freshness becomes part of their social power. Inside a manor or castle, hygiene takes on an even stranger form. Privies are built into the walls, their shafts dropping into the moat or a pit below. The smell seeps back into the chambers, masked by rushes strewn on the floor and scented with herbs. Washing basins stand ready in the Lord's chamber, filled by servants with warmed water. Here washing might be done in private, a luxury that contrasts sharply with the public fountains and communal wells of the town. But even here, daily full-body bathing is rare. You might wash your hands before a meal, your face in the morning, and perhaps your feet before bed, but that's the extent of it. If you watch the kitchens, you'll see their own rhythm of cleaning. After the rush of preparing a feast, the scullions scrape the boards and rinse the knives, sometimes wiping them down with vinegar or wine. The stone floors are swept toward the drains, and the leftover scraps are given to the pigs or tossed into the refuse pit. Smoke from the open fire clings to every surface, darkening the walls, but it also helps keep insects at bay. It's a strange balance, one kind of dirt holding back another. And then there's the laundry. On washing days, women gather at the riverbank, beating clothes against stones, scrubbing them with ash soap, and rinsing them in cold water. The garments are spread on bushes or hung on lines to dry the wind, carrying away the last traces of smoke and sweat. This is as clean as things get here, a moment when the smell of sun-warmed linen is as close to freshness as the past can offer. Still, as the sun sets and you make your way back toward the center of town, you can't help but notice that cleanliness here is not about eliminating all dirt. It's about keeping the balance between what can be endured and what would make life unbearable. It's a different standard, one built on habit, environment, and tradition rather than on scientific knowledge. You find yourself wondering how you'd adapt if you had to live by those rules, whether you'd grow used to the smells, the textures, the casual acceptance of what you now see as filth. And as the moon rises, casting pale light over the rooftops and fields, you realize that in this world, hygiene is less about perfection and more about resilience, a way of living that lets people keep going season after season, century after century. You leave the open fields behind and slip back into the denser heart of the town, where the streets wind in loops and dead ends as if designed to trap the air in place. The scents intensify here, the sourness of yesterday's ale spilled outside the tavern, the sharp bite of tanned leather, the faint sweetness of baking bread. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith hammers iron, the smoke from his forge curling into the street. In this tightly packed world, everyone's habits bleed into each other's lives, and hygiene is as much a community matter as it is an individual one. In some corners, civic authorities have tried to impose rules. Notices, sometimes carved into wood, sometimes announced in the square, warn against dumping waste too close to wells, against letting pigs roam freely in the market, against leaving rotting hides outside the tanneries. These rules aren't always followed, but they're a sign that even without modern science, people know that filth can poison water and make people sick. A town might have a designated midden for refuse or a dunghill outside the walls. But these solutions work only if people actually carry their waste that far, and many don't. Water supply is another constant concern. Wells are the lifeblood of the town, and their cleanliness is guarded fiercely. In some places, chains are locked across the well when disease spreads to stop strangers from fouling it. Springs and fountains are sometimes decorated with statues of saints, the water blessed in hopes of keeping it pure. You watch as a woman rinses a wooden cup in the fountain, filling it again for her thirsty child. The water is cool and clear, but you can't stop thinking about how easily it could be tainted. Inside the houses, you notice another layer of hygiene, one born from the struggle to keep pests at bay. Mice and rats slip in through gaps in the walls attracted by grain stores and kitchen scraps. Cats are kept not just as companions, but as working animals, their presence a natural form of pest control. Dogs, too, help guard food from larger scavengers, though they bring their own share of fleas and dirt. Bedding is shaken out when the weather is fair, hung over railings, or spread on hedges to air. This doesn't eliminate the lice, but it reduces them, and in a world where reducing is often the best you can do, that counts as victory. Personal hygiene here also reflects the tools available. Combs are treasured items, sometimes carved from bone, sometimes fashioned from wood, their fine teeth worn smooth with use. Tweezers exist, too, used for plucking stray hairs or removing splinters. Soap is still a rare commodity, and when it is used, it's harsh, so many rely on plain water for washing. Perfumes and pomanders, small balls filled with aromatic herbs, serve to mask odors. You see one hanging from the belt of a passing merchant swinging gently, with his steps a portable bubble of pleasant scent in an otherwise pungent street. Religion plays its part in defining what clean means. Ritual washing before prayer is common in some cultures, less so in others, but almost everywhere cleanliness is linked with moral virtue in one way or another. On feast days and holy days, extra care is taken to wash hands, change into fresh clothing, and tidy the home. Pilgrims visiting shrines often wash before entering, both as a sign of respect and as a way to refresh themselves after the road. The connection between the soul and the body's cleanliness might not be backed by modern microbiology, but it's deeply felt. And yet you also see the limits of what's possible. A woman scrubs her doorstep with a stiff brush, pouring a bucket of gray water down the gutter, only for a neighbor to dump kitchen slops a few feet away. A boy chases a runaway chicken straight through the puddle she's made. In the absence of sealed pipes running water and drains, every effort toward cleanliness can be undone in a moment. You start to understand why many people put their faith not in washing, but in resilience, in building a body and a spirit that can withstand a less than pristine environment. The smells follow you as you walk, not overwhelming anymore, but constant. They weave together into something you're beginning to think of as the scent of life here: wood smoke, animals, cooked grain, human sweat, and the ever-present undertone of the street itself. You imagine waking each day in a bed of rough linen sheets, hearing the clatter of buckets at the well, and stepping into this air without a second thought. What feels foreign now would over time become your normal. Night draws in faster within the walls, and lanterns glow in the windows. In the market square, the last of the merchants are packing up, brushing crumbs from their tables, sweeping their stalls clean. The sweep is more for appearance than for sanitation, but it still makes the place feel tidier. You realize that here cleanliness is as much about perception as about reality, about presenting yourself and your surroundings as cared for, even if every crevice still hides a trace of the day's life. You find a spot at the edge of the square and watch as people pass, some with baskets of laundry, some with pails of water, some carrying armfuls of herbs or wood. They're all participating in the endless unspoken work of keeping themselves and their homes just clean enough to function. It's not the kind of hygiene you know, but it's a system, and it's held together by the rhythms of life, the habits of generations, and the quiet acceptance that perfection isn't possible here. You wander away from the market square and follow a narrow lane that slopes gently toward the river. The sound of water grows louder, not the gentle trickle of a mountain stream, but the deeper rush of a current carrying the runoff of an entire town. The river is both life and hazard here, the source of drinking water for those who live nearest to it, the site for washing clothes and fetching pails, and also the final destination for waste. You stand on the bank and watch as a woman kneels in the shallows, beating a tunic against a flat stone. Just a few yards downstream, a boy tosses in a bucketful of kitchen scraps, the vegetable peels and fish bones spinning away in the current. It's a contradiction that people here live with daily. The same water that cleans can also carry sickness. They don't understand germ theory, but they've learned through bitter experience that foul-smelling water makes people ill. So when the river runs high and fast, they trust it to wash away contamination. When it slows or stagnates, they avoid drinking from it if they can. In places with wells, the water might be cleaner, but it can still be tainted if the well is too close to a cesspit or latrine. The town's layout itself can be a silent enemy. Along the riverbank, you see a line of women scrubbing wooden bowls with handfuls of sand, the gritty texture scouring away grease. A little further along, hides from the tanner's yard soak in vats, the smell so strong it catches in your throat. The tanner works here because no one wants his trade inside the walls. The waste is too foul, the smell too lingering. Yet the leather he produces is essential for shoes, belts, harnesses, and countless other things that keep life moving. In the world before synthetic materials, every useful thing comes with a cost to the senses. As you follow the bank, you come to a small wooden bridge, its planks worn smooth by countless feet. Underneath the current tugs at trailing weeds, and you can see the shadowy shapes of fish darting between stones. Fishing is another part of life here, but it comes with its own rules of hygiene. Fish are gutted quickly, the waste thrown back to the river, the flesh cooked the same day if possible. Salted or smoked fish will last longer, but only if the curing process is done properly. A spoiled batch could sicken an entire family, and without refrigeration, preservation is a matter of skill, not machines. Crossing the bridge, you pass into a cluster of smaller cottages. Here, the homes are simpler, their yards cluttered with tools, drying herbs, and the occasional tethered goat. Herbs aren't just for cooking, they're one of the key defenses against bad smells and in the minds of many bad health. Bundles of sage, rosemary, and lavender hang from rafters, filling the air with their fragrance. A woman grinds mint leaves with coarse salt to make a kind of tooth powder. Children chew licorice root, partly for the taste, partly because it's thought to freshen the breath. Inside one of these cottages, you notice a simple wooden tub pushed against the wall. It's not for daily bathing. Water is too precious for that, but for occasional soaks, especially for small children or the sick. The water will be heated in the hearth, carried in by the bucket, and reused by several members of the family before being tossed outside. In summer, washing might be done outdoors in larger basins, the sun warming the water and drying the skin after. In winter, the tub might not be used for months, replaced by a routine of wiping down with a damp cloth and changing into the cleanest clothing available. From here, you can see the fields beyond the town, a reminder that hygiene isn't just about people, it's about the land. Farmers rotate where they dump manure, knowing that too much in one place will burn the soil instead of feeding it. Crops are planted in ways that keep the edible parts off the ground, reducing contact with the dirt and pests. This practical wisdom comes not from books, but from generations of observation and survival. You realize that much of the cleanliness in this world is less about removing every trace of dirt and more about managing where it is and how it's used. Even the act of eating reflects these values. Meals are taken from shared dishes, each person using bread fingers or a personal knife to take their portion. Hands are wiped on cloths or simply on the bread itself. After the meal, fingers are rinsed in a communal bowl or wiped again. In wealthier homes, guests might be offered perfumed water in a ewer poured over their hands into a basin. In poorer homes, rinsing may be skipped entirely, the meal ending with a wipe on the apron and a return to work. As the evening deepens, you hear laughter from a group of neighbors gathered outside one of the cottages. Someone has set a pot of ale to warm, and the scent drifts toward you. People talk, sing, and tell stories, their voices carrying through the night air. It strikes you that despite the lack of soap and running water, there's a certain joy here, a contentment that doesn't seem to mind the dust on the floor or the smell of the animals. Hygiene here is not about achieving some sterile ideal. It's about keeping life in balance, preventing the worst of what could happen, and accepting the rest as simply part of living. You leave the group behind, heading back toward the main road, and you can still hear the river in the distance, that ever-flowing, double-edged current washing away and carrying along the traces of every life lived here. The main road leads you past the gates and into the countryside, where the pace of life is slower, but no less bound to the rhythms of hygiene, or the lack of it. Out here, without the press of neighbors and the restrictions of city walls, you might think people would be cleaner, freer, to bathe in streams, to keep their homes airy and fresh. And in some ways, they are. But the absence of crowding doesn't mean the absence of dirt. If anything, the work of the countryside keeps people in near constant contact with it. You walk along a cart track bordered by hedgerows, the air scented with wildflowers, and the deeper, earthy smell of freshly turned soil. A farmer in the distance is spreading manure on his fields, and the wind carries that unmistakable tang toward you. His hands and boots are coated in it, and you know that when he comes in for supper, he'll wipe them clean on a rag, or his trousers rinse briefly at the pump, and sit down to eat. There's no fastidious scrubbing, just enough to make himself presentable. This is the pattern: remove what's uncomfortable, leave the rest, and get on with the day. The homes here are often single-room cottages, the hearth in the center, smoke venting through a hole in the roof. Bedding is laid on raised wooden frames or directly on straw pallets, the straw changed only a few times a year. To keep the bedding fresh, people add herbs to it: tansy to deter fleas, lavender for scent, pennyroyal for its insect-repelling properties. Over time, the herbs dry and crumble, mixing with the dust and straw beneath. In the absence of laundering mattresses or blankets regularly, this is the compromise. You imagine lying down after a long day's work, the smell of dried plants faint under the stronger scent of sweat and smoke that clings to every fiber. Washing clothes in the countryside is no easier than in the town. Without a public wash house or ready access to a riverbank gathering place, families do laundry where they cast at a pond, a small stream, or with water hauled from a well. The work is back-breaking, hauling water, heating it if needed, scrubbing until your hands are raw. As a result, washing days are rare, and the garments worn in between become saturated with the smells of work cooking and the animals that live alongside the people. Here, animals are not just near the home, they often share the living space. Chickens roost in corners, a goat might be tethered near the hearth in winter, and dogs curl up close for warmth. The mingling of human and animal life brings its own set of hygiene realities. Floors, even when swept, are never spotless, and the smells are layered: hay, fur, dung, wood smoke, and cooking. Yet to the people here, these scents are not unpleasant. They're the smells of survival, of security, of having food and warmth close by. Bathing is usually a seasonal act. In summer, a family might make a day of going to a nearby stream, washing themselves and their clothes together in the sun. In winter, the most anyone might manage is a heated basin for washing the face, hands, and feet. Children are often bathed more regularly than adults, not for hygiene's sake as you'd define it, but because their mess is more visible and harder to ignore. Babies might be wiped with cloths soaked in warm water, and herbs, the ritual soothing them, as much as cleaning them. One thing that strikes you here is the role of herbal knowledge in maintaining health. Without disinfectants or antibiotics, people turn to plants, rosemary steeped in water for rinsing wounds, vinegar infused with garlic for washing cuts, sage tea for sore throats. These treatments sometimes work, sometimes don't, but they're rooted in centuries of observation. A sprig of rue might be carried in the pocket as a charm against illness, its strong scent a shield against bad air. You notice that these practices often blur the line between hygiene medicine and superstition, and in this world, all three are intertwined. Meals are another place where rural hygiene reveals itself. Bread is the staple baked in outdoor ovens or shared communal ones. Utensils are limited. Most eat with their hands or with a personal knife, and the cleaning process is quick and efficient. Bowls and knives are rinsed, sometimes scrubbed with sand, and left to dry in the air. There's no soap involved, but the physical act of scrubbing and the drying sun keep things functional. In the absence of germ theory, clean means looks clean and smells fine. As you pass one cottage, you catch the sound of someone singing. An old woman sits in the doorway mending a shirt with nimble fingers. A small basin of water rests beside her, and every so often she dips the needle into it, before pulling it through the cloth, a habit you don't understand until you realize she's using it to keep the thread supple. Even in this small act, water is precious, used sparingly, and for multiple purposes before it's discarded. The day wanes and the sun spills gold across the fields. A group of children chase each other through the dust, their bare feet kicking up clouds, their laughter carrying far. You realize they haven't washed since morning, and they won't before bed, not because they're neglected, but because it simply isn't necessary here. Dirt will be brushed off clothes, shaken out, and tomorrow will start much the same as today. As you turn back toward the road, you see the entire scene for what it is, a world where hygiene isn't about eradicating filth, but about learning to live in harmony with it. Where cleanliness is measured not in soap and sterilization, but in the balance between effort and necessity. And for the people who live here, that balance works, it has to. You return toward the town just as the bells in the church tower begin to toll their sound, carrying far over the rooftops and fields. The evening service is about to begin, and with it comes one of the few moments in the week when people make an extra effort to tidy themselves. You follow the slow trickle of townsfolk toward the square, noticing small changes in their appearance. A cleaner shift peeking from under a tunic, hair more carefully braided or combed, hands wiped on a damp cloth before stepping inside. It's not a transformation by modern standards, but in this world it's a mark of respect and a social necessity. The church itself smells different from the streets outside. The rushes on the floor are newer here, scattered with herbs like lavender and thyme, and the faint smoke of incense lingers in the air. Incense serves both a spiritual and a practical purpose. It masks the odors of a crowded space and, in the minds of many, purifies the air. You can imagine how the mixture of human breath, woolen clothing, and damp earth might otherwise overwhelm the senses in an enclosed stone building. Before the service begins, you watch as a boy carries a basin of water to the side of the nave. A few people pause to dip their fingers and cross themselves. The act is spiritual, but you can't help noticing that it's also one of the rare public opportunities for people to wet their hands. The water isn't changed often, and it's shared by many, but the symbolism outweighs any thought of hygiene in the modern sense. Once the service starts, the rhythm of the chants and the soft flicker of candles draw your attention. You think about how, for many people here, their cleanest moments are tied to rituals, to Sundays, feast days, weddings, and funerals. Cleanliness isn't a daily pursuit. It's reserved for occasions that matter most to the community. The effort put into those moments, washing clothes, scrubbing hands, combing hair, signals belonging and respectability in ways that transcend physical dirt. After the service, the square fills again, this time with chatter and the shuffle of feet on cobblestones. Some linger to talk, others head straight for the tavern. The tavern is its own sensory experience. The smell of ale roasting meat, unwashed bodies, and the sharp tang of wood smoke. It's noisy, crowded, and in its own way alive with warmth. Hygiene here is incidental. The benches might be wiped down once a day, mugs rinsed in a tub of water between uses, and the floor swept when it becomes too cluttered with scraps. But the focus is on sustenance and company, not sterility. In the corner, a woman sells small pouches of dried herbs, claiming they will sweeten the breath or keep the humors in balance. People buy them without question, tucking the pouches into their clothing or chewing the herbs as they drink. These are the folk remedies that fill the gap left by the absence of soap, toothpaste, or antiseptic. They don't prevent illness in the way you might hope, but they offer comfort. And in this world, comfort is its own form of health. You step back outside the night air cooler now and follow a narrow lane toward a cluster of small workshops. A cooper is rinsing his tools at the pump, the water spilling onto the ground in a glistening arc. He's careful to keep his barrels free of residue, knowing that stale or sour smells could ruin whatever they hold: wine, ale, pickled vegetables. Here, cleanliness is about preserving the value of goods. A tainted batch could mean the loss of a season's income. This kind of practical hygiene is respected not because it keeps hands clean, but because it keeps bellies full and trade alive. Past the cooper's shop, you find a small courtyard where women are plucking chickens, their fingers working quickly to strip the feathers. The smell is sharp, a mix of raw poultry, damp feathers, and boiling water from the scalding pot. Afterward, the feathers will be washed and dried for bedding, while the carcasses will be cleaned as thoroughly as possible before cooking. This is one of the few moments when hands and tools are washed multiple times in quick succession. Even without knowing the science of bacteria, people here understand that some tasks simply require more care. By the time you reach the edge of the square again, the streets are quieting. Lanterns glow in windows, and the sound of shutters closing echoes softly from above. You think about how this entire day has been a dance between dirt and cleanliness, between what can be changed and what must be accepted. Hygiene is woven into every action, in the handling of food, the maintenance of tools, the preparation for worship. But it's never pursued for its own sake. It's always in service of survival, of dignity, or of ritual. The bells chime once more in the distance, marking the hour. You realize you've walked through an entire cycle of daily life here, and in doing so, you've seen how deeply the past is shaped by a very different idea of what it means to be clean. You decide to follow the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat, winding your way toward the town's edge where small holdings and gardens press up against the walls. Here people grow their own vegetables, keep a few animals, and live in a rhythm where cleanliness comes from necessity, not luxury. A woman bends over a row of cabbages, her hands deep in the soil, pulling weeds that threaten to choke the plants. Dirt coats her fingers, works into the creases of her skin, and she doesn't seem to notice. She'll rinse her hands in a bucket before supper, but the soil under her nails will remain until it wears away through work. You pass a small yard where laundry hangs from a line, shirts, shifts, and stockings swaying in the evening breeze. The air smells faintly of wood ash from the lye used to scrub the fabric. Clothes here are never as spotless as the ones you know. The fibers hold on to faint stains and smells no matter how hard they're beaten, boiled, and rinsed. Still, that scent of ash and sun tells the people who wear them that the garments are clean enough, a standard built on effort, not perfection. A boy leads a cow toward a trough, its hooves clopping over the packed dirt. The water in the trough is murky, but it will serve for the night. Animals drink from the same supply that might later be used for washing tools or soaking clothes. This casual mixing of uses would horrify you in your own time, but here it's normal. The idea that water must be kept separate for different purposes hasn't yet taken hold. Water is water, and you use what you have. As you wander further, you find yourself in a lane lined with small workshops, a weaver's, a potter's, a blacksmith's. In the weaver's shop, lengths of cloth hang from beams, the air filled with the dry, fibrous smell of flax and wool. The floor is swept daily, not to remove all dirt, but to keep the work from being spoiled. In the potter's yard, clay dust coats everything, and the tools are rinsed only when they begin to gum up. At the smithy, the air is metallic, and smoky sweat running down the smith's arms as he works. Each trade has its own kind of dirt, and each has its own rules about when and how to clean. You notice how communal these spaces are. Tools are shared, benches are used by many hands, and the notion of personal hygiene is always balanced against shared responsibility. A filthy tool can ruin a batch of work for everyone, so cleaning the tool matters. But the smith's apron, black with soot and oil, might not be washed for months, because its dirt doesn't affect the product. Here, clean means fit for purpose, not free from all grime. Beyond the workshops lies the tannery tucked away near the moat, where its smell will bother fewer people. This is perhaps the most pungent place you've encountered. Hides soak in vats of urine, and water, the liquid used to soften them before scraping. The tanner works with bare hands, his skin stained from years of contact with the process. He will rinse in the river later, but the smell clings to him as much a part of his identity as his trade. People in town avoid standing too close to him, yet they depend on his work for shoes belts and saddles. His hygiene by necessity is different from theirs, defined by what allows him to keep working in such conditions. The sun is low now, and you walk along the moat, its still surface catching the light. In some places, waste from the town drains here, the water thick with refuse. Yet ducks swim happily, and children lean over to toss them scraps. You can't help but think about how these same waters might someday serve another purpose. Watering gardens, cooling tools, even bathing. To the people here, water is judged by its availability, not its purity. As night begins to fall, you return toward the main gate. The guards stand by their armor, catching the last light. Even armor has its own rules of hygiene, leather straps, oiled to keep them supple, metal wiped free of rust when time allows. Sweat builds under the padding worn beneath, and the smell of a soldier's gear is sharp and unmistakable. Washing it is rare. Maintenance is about function, not freshness. The streets inside are quieter now, the work of the day winding down. You pass a doorway where a mother is wiping her child's face with the corner of her apron, her motions brisk but affectionate. The cloth is not clean by your standards, but it's the closest thing at hand. The child laughs, wriggles free, and runs off. Another day ended without a bath, but with the marks of care still visible in the gesture. You realize as you walk that every moment of cleaning you've seen today is tied to something tangible, A task, a trade, a ritual, or a season. Nothing is done purely for the sake of feeling fresh. Everything serves a larger purpose. Hygiene here is not a separate part of life. It is life woven into the work, the worship, and the weather. And in that way, it's as constant as the dirt it tries, and never fully succeeds to chase away. You wake the next morning to the sound of wooden wheels creaking over cobblestones and the low hum of voices in the street below. The air through the open window is cool but carries the faint sourness of yesterday's life. Cooking fires, damp rushes, animals that have been penned too close through the night. You pull on your boots and step outside the street and already busy with people beginning their day. Morning is when the cycle of cleaning starts again, though not in the way you're used to. Here, it's more about resetting the stage than removing every trace of the day before. A woman is already sweeping her doorway, her broom of bound twigs scratching over the stones. She isn't aiming to get the street clean. She's pushing the worst of yesterday's dirt and scraps away from her threshold. It's a gesture as much about pride as hygiene, telling neighbors that her household is orderly. A man across the way pours a bucket of water from the well onto his stretch of the gutter, swishing away the thicker mud. The water runs downhill, carrying bits of straw and refuse with it. But you know it will all settle somewhere else in the street, and someone else will face the same task later. Breakfast smells fill the air, bread warming on hearthstones, porridge bubbling in iron pots. Meals in the morning are quick, and the cleanup even quicker. Bowls are wiped with a crust of bread or rinsed with a little water, the same water often used for the next task. Soap isn't part of this routine unless it's laundry day, and then it's the coarse, lye-heavy kind that stings the skin. You wander toward the market square where stallholders are setting out their goods. This is one of the cleaner places in town, at least at the start of the day. Stalls are brushed down tables wiped with cloths and produce arranged neatly. Fishmongers sprinkle water over their displays to keep the catch looking fresh, though the smell is still sharp and briny. But by midday, the square will be littered with dropped leaves, bones, and other scraps. Sweeping happens only after the market closes, and even then it's more to keep vermin in check than to make the place sparkle. In a corner of the square, a barber is setting up his chair. His tools, razors, scissors, combs are laid out on a small table. Between customers, he'll wipe them on a cloth, perhaps rinse them in water, but there's no sterilization as you know it. The barber is more than just a hair cutter. He's also a tooth puller, a wound cleaner, even a minor surgeon when needed. His hygiene is pragmatic, clean enough to keep the tools functional, but not enough to meet any modern medical standard. And yet his customers trust him because he has skill and experience. Nearby, a baker pulls loaves from a stone oven, the golden crusts dusted with flour. The oven itself is swept between batches, embers moved aside to make space for the dough. The baker's hands are coated in flour, his apron streaked with dough, and he doesn't pause to wash between handling coins and handling bread. To you, it feels careless. To him, it's just the flow of work. The bread is baked at such high heat that anything harmful is in theory destroyed. That's the logic of this place, and in many cases, it works well enough to keep people fed without constant sickness. Walking beyond the square, you pass the public well where women gather to draw water. The rope is wet from repeated use, the bucket splashed and worn smooth. People chat as they wait their turn, swapping news and recipes, their hands resting on the handles of pails. No one minds that dozens of hands touch the same rope and bucket each day. There's no sense here of invisible contamination, only the visible dirt that can be washed away. The rhythm of the morning is almost soothing in its repetition. Sweep, fetch water, cook, rinse, move on. No one rushes to make their surroundings sterile, but no one ignores the mess entirely. It's a constant balance between living with dirt and pushing it just far enough away to make space for the next part of the day. You notice that the people who seem most respected in the community aren't the cleanest by appearance, but the most orderly in their habits, the ones whose homes are swept, whose tools are maintained, whose clothes are mended even if they're not spotless. By late morning, the sun is higher and the smells of the town have shifted. The sharper scents of cooking fires mix with the warm tang of bodies that have been working for hours. Somewhere someone is baking pies. Elsewhere meat is roasting on a spit. It's not unpleasant, just layered the smell of life lived close and without much separation between people, work, and the environment. You stop to watch a boy fill a wooden tub with water from a barrel. He tosses in handfuls of herbs, stirring them with a stick, before handing a mug of the infusion to an older woman. She drinks it slowly, and you realize it's more for health than refreshment, a kind of herbal tonic meant to keep illness at bay. Hygiene here is often swallowed rather than scrubbed. Protection is something you ingest in the hope that it will work from the inside out. As the morning passes, you find yourself thinking less about the dirt and more about the constant quiet acts that keep it in check. They don't eliminate it, nothing here does, but they shape it, manage it, and live alongside it in a way that feels strangely sustainable. You start to wonder if the past's version of cleanliness is less about removing what's unwanted and more about learning to live within its boundaries. By midday, the sun is high enough to warm the stones under your feet, and the town has shifted into its busiest hours. You wander through the market again, this time dodging the jostle of bodies and the occasional splash of water from stalls where fish are being cleaned. The air is thick with mingled smells, fried dough sizzling in pans, smoked meat hanging from hooks, the grassy sweetness of fresh herbs bundled for sale. Hygiene here isn't a backdrop. It's an active part of every transaction, even if it's not the kind you're used to. You watch a butcher at work, his knife flashing as he carves slabs of pork. The blade is wiped on his apron, between cuts, the wooden block, under the meat stained from years of use. Every so often, he tosses scraps to a dog lying nearby, its tail thumping against the ground. The dog's presence isn't just for company. It keeps the space clear of unwanted rodents. This is how hygiene works here, not by eliminating mess entirely, but by keeping it in a balance that the people can live with. At another stall, a woman sells butter, each lump wrapped in cloth. She lifts a corner to show a customer the pale yellow inside, then folds it back, her hands dusted with flour from another task. You realize that there's no expectation that she washed between handling one product and another. People here live so closely with the sources of their food that the idea of cross-contamination doesn't carry the same weight. In the center of the square, a fountain trickles steadily. Women rinse vegetables in its basin, the water splashing over the stone lip and onto the street. A child cups his hands to drink, unbothered by the fact that the same water just flowed over carrots and cabbages covered in soil. For them, this is fresh, clean water flowing and cool straight from the source. You know it's not truly free from risk, but it's the best option they have. Leaving the market, you follow the smell of baking bread toward a large communal oven. Here, families who don't have their own ovens bring their dough to bake. The baker tends to each batch in turn, sliding loaves in with a long-handled paddle, then pulling them out when the crusts are just right. Between batches, the oven floor is swept with a damp cloth to remove ashes. This quick wipe is the only cleaning it gets, but the heat of the fire is believed to kill anything harmful, and often it does. Near the oven, you pass a group of women seated in a circle mending clothing. The air smells faintly of wool and lanolin, the natural oil in the fibers. As they work, they share news advice and sometimes remedies for the ailments of the season. You hear one woman recommending washing a child's hair with vinegar to rid it of lice, another swearing by the use of rosemary water to strengthen the scalp. These treatments blur the line between hygiene and medicine, rooted in the belief that what smells clean must also make the body healthy. Farther along, you find yourself in a quieter street, where houses back directly onto the town wall. Here the gutters run slower, and you see the accumulation of days, bits of straw leaves, and the occasional chicken feather. A woman leans from a window, tossing a pail of gray water down to join it. The splash sends a few hens scurrying, but no one seems to mind. The street will be walked on lived in and washed over again when the next rain comes. In this world, nature often does more cleaning than the people do. Stepping back toward the center, you pass a small apothecary. Inside shelves are lined with jars of powders, dried plants, and mysterious liquids. Some are for healing, others for purification. A concept that overlaps heavily with hygiene. A jar of alum might be sold to whiten the skin, another of crushed mint to freshen the breath. A small pot of rose-scented salve promises to keep the air sweet when dabbed on the temples or under the nose. These aren't just luxuries. They're part of how people here interact with the idea of being clean, fragrant, and healthy. As you stand in the doorway, a man enters carrying a bundle of cloth. He's here for vinegar, not to drink, but to soak rags in. He explains it will keep away sickness when tied over the face, especially if he must go near the homes of the sick. You realize this is one of the earliest forms of a face covering its purpose, rooted in the miasma theory that disease comes from bad smells. In a way, it's both right and wrong. It doesn't protect against germs as you understand them, but it does reduce direct exposure to certain hazards. By the time you step outside again, the sun is beginning to dip. The market is quieter now, and the scent of fresh bread has given way to the savory aroma of evening meals being prepared. You pass a row of houses where smoke curls from chimneys, each one adding its own flavor to the air. You know that inside people are repeating the small acts that keep their homes livable, wiping hands on aprons, sweeping crumbs from the table, rinsing mugs in a shared basin. Walking back toward the square, you realize that in this world, cleanliness is never absolute. It's a shifting point on a spectrum determined by season, task, and resources. It's something negotiated daily, not enforced by a set of fixed rules. And the people here live within that shifting balance so naturally that they don't even think of it as a compromise. It's simply life. The evening settles in with a kind of quiet that's never truly silent. The distant murmur of voices. The occasional clatter of a pot, the low bleating of a goat tied just beyond a doorway. You make your way toward the poorer quarter of town, where houses lean into each other, their upper stories almost touching above the narrow lanes. Here, space is tighter, air is heavier, and hygiene becomes a constant negotiation between what's possible and what's unavoidable. You notice that the gutters are fuller here, carrying away the day's waste more slowly. In the dim light, you catch sight of what they hold: vegetable scraps, the odd fish head, a smear of something you'd rather not identify. The smell is thicker too, as if it has nowhere to escape. Yet even here, people make small efforts to keep their immediate space livable. A woman has sprinkled crushed herbs along her threshold, their sharp scent cutting through the damp air. Another has hung a bunch of lavender in the window, not because she thinks it kills disease, but because it makes her home smell sweeter. Inside one cramped dwelling, you see a family gathered around a small table. The floor is dirt swept daily with a stiff broom to push away loose debris. The bedding in the corner is rolled up against the wall to make space for the evening meal. A single candle flickers on the table, and in its glow, the mother dips a cloth into a basin of water to wipe her children's faces and hands. This isn't a bath, the water is too precious for that, but it's enough to remove the most obvious grime before sleep. It's also a ritual of care, a way to end the day feeling just a little cleaner than it began. You pass by another home where the door is open to the night air. Inside, a man is mending a fishing net, his fingers moving deftly through the rough twine. At his side, a bucket of water holds a rag, and a small wooden brush tools for scrubbing the day's catch from the nets. The brush will later be used on the table, the bench, perhaps even the floor in the morning. Everything here serves more than one purpose. Nothing is thrown away until it's completely worn out. The idea of single-use cleaning tools simply doesn't exist. In the street, a group of children chase each other through the shadows, their laughter echoing between the buildings. Their bare feet slap against the stones, and when they tumble, they get up with scraped knees and dusty palms. No one rushes to clean the wounds, a quick spit, and a rub will do for now. The deeper cleaning, if any, will come later and might involve nothing more than rinsing with water and tying on a scrap of cloth. The smells in this part of town are sharper boiled cabbage from a pot over a fire, the tang of fermenting ale from a cask left to breathe the faint ammonia note of a chamber pot, emptied into the gutter. Yet there's no sense of embarrassment here. These smells are part of life shared by everyone. To try to erase them entirely would be impossible. The focus is on keeping them from becoming overwhelming, and that's a task people manage through habit, not perfection. As you walk, you come to a small open square where neighbors gather to talk. Someone has lit a brazier in the center, and the smoke helps drive away insects. This is a kind of hygiene too, the slow burning of certain woods and herbs, to keep pests from biting and to mask the other odors of the night. People stand close to the heat, warming their hands, passing cups of ale and talking over the day's events. Here, the idea of cleanliness is as much about community as it is about the body or home. Shared warmth, shared protection from pests, shared air that feels just a little less oppressive. A young man with a lute begins to play, and the sound draws more people from their homes. In the flickering light, you notice that even the poorest here wear their better shirts for this evening, gathering the ones without obvious holes, the ones that might have been washed in the last week. Cleanliness in this sense is about presentation, about showing yourself to others in a way that earns respect, even if it doesn't erase the day's labor from your skin and clothes. As the music plays, you take in the scene, the mix of dirt and care, the smells and sounds, the small acts of tidying that give shape to the day. You realize that here, hygiene isn't a battle to be won. It's a rhythm to be maintained. The goal isn't to eliminate every trace of life, but to live within it comfortably enough to keep going tomorrow. The brazier crackles, the children's laughter fades into the distance, and the night wraps the quarter in a haze of smoke and candlelight. Somewhere water sloshes in a bucket, and a broom scratches over stone the quiet sounds of a world resetting itself one small gesture at a time. The night deepens, and the streets take on a different life, quieter, but far from still. You walk through the dimly lit lanes where the light from windows spills faintly onto the cobblestones, catching in the mist that rises from the gutters. Somewhere a cat darts across your path, vanishing into a gap between houses. The air is damp and cool now, carrying the mingled scents of wood smoke earth and something faintly sour that clings to the stones. In this hour, hygiene takes a back seat to warmth and safety. Most people are indoors, and the world outside is left to its own slow settling. Inside the homes you pass, the day's final routines are unfolding. A mother rinses a basin of water one last time before setting it by the hearth, ready for morning. In another home, a man shakes out a blanket at the doorway, the motion sending a faint cloud of dust into the street before he brings it back inside. The idea is not to clean it thoroughly, but to let out the worst of the stale air trapped inside the folds. It's a nightly habit in many homes, and it's as close to freshening up as most bedding will get for weeks. You stop at a stable where the sound of low, steady breathing comes from within. The animals have been fed and watered, their stalls swept just enough to keep them dry through the night. The smell is strong hay manure and the warm musk of livestock, but here it's not considered unpleasant. In fact, to many, it's the scent of health and prosperity, a sign that the animals are alive and well. This acceptance of certain odors as part of life is a thread you've seen everywhere. Only the smells that signal sickness or spoilage are treated as truly dangerous. Not far from the stable, you come to a small workshop where a candle still burns. A cooper is finishing the last staves of a barrel, the rhythmic thud of his mallet echoing in the quiet. His workbench is cluttered with shavings and tools, but the bench itself is kept free of anything that could rot or sour the wood. This is his version of cleanliness, targeted, precise, and aimed at preserving the quality of the product. In this world, the tidiness of a workspace is judged not by its appearance, but by whether it protects the craft. You follow the curve of the lane toward the river. Here, the sound of water is softer than in daylight, a muted murmur under the hush of the night. A figure crouches at the bank, rinsing a cloth in the current. You realize it's one of the town's washerwomen finishing late after a day of labor. In the moonlight, the movement of her hands is slow and methodical, working the cloth against itself before wringing it out. The water may not be perfectly clean, but the act itself transforms the fabric, removing visible dirt, replacing the smell of sweat with the cooler scent of the river. On your way back from the river, you pass the bathhouse, not the grand Roman kind you've read about, but a simple, low building with a thin curl of steam escaping from its roof. It's not open to everyone tonight. Private clients have rented it for a few hours. Inside, wooden tubs have been filled with heated water, and the steam carries the scent of rosemary and mint. For those who can afford it, this is the height of luxury to sit in warm water, to feel the grime of days dissolve, and to leave smelling of herbs instead of smoke. But even this indulgence doesn't happen daily or even weekly. It's a rare treat bound to special occasions or the needs of the ill. Further along, you notice the quiet work of the night soil men. They move like shadows, carrying buckets from the latrines and cesspits toward the outskirts of town. It's dangerous work, not just for the smell, but for the risk of disease, though they would never describe it that way. To them, it's simply a job, one that keeps the streets from becoming unbearable, one load at a time. Without their labor, the balance between life and filth would tip quickly. Back in the main street, most doors are shut, the town settling into its slower heartbeat. Yet you can still hear the occasional scrape of a broom, the splash of a bucket, the faint thud of rugs being shaken. These aren't deep cleanses, just small acts meant to make the morning easier. In this way, hygiene here is cumulative, built on hundreds of tiny moments, each one chipping away at the grime, never erasing it completely, but keeping it just manageable enough for life to go on. The moon hangs above the rooftops, silvering the damp stones, and you realize that tomorrow will begin exactly the same way. The dirt will return, the smells will return, and so will the quiet, endless work of keeping them at bay. It's not a battle anyone here expects to win, but it's one they know how to fight. Morning comes again, earlier than you expect, with the clatter of carts over stone and the hollow thump of a wooden pail being set down by the well. You open your eyes to the pale light that filters through shutters, the air inside already carrying the scent of smoke from the first hearths being lit. In this hour before the day truly begins, you see another layer of hygiene unfold, the reset that comes between night and work. Stepping outside, you find women drawing water in quick succession, the ropes creaking, buckets splashing into the well. Some of this water will be used for cooking, some for rinsing tools or cloths, and some for the small morning wash that keeps faces and hands free of the worst dirt. At one doorway, a boy crouches with a basin, splashing his face, then rubbing his hands together in the same water before shaking them dry. His mother wipes his cheeks with the corner of her apron, smoothing his hair with her damp palm. These are gestures repeated countless times in countless homes, more about appearance and ritual than thorough cleansing. On the street, stallholders begin their own brand of tidying. Bread carts are swept clean of crumbs before being loaded. Fishmongers toss the remains of yesterday's catch into the gutter to be carried away by the next rain or scavenged by dogs. A man who sells cheese trims away the outer layer from his wheels, revealing the fresher portion within an act that is as much about hygiene as it is about making the product more appealing to buyers. Passing the tavern, you see the door propped open, the floor inside being swept and sprinkled with water to keep the dust down. The smell of stale ale still lingers, but the fresh rushes on the floor soften it. The mugs and jugs from the night before sit in a basin outside, soaking in water that has already turned cloudy. Soon they'll be wiped with cloths and set out again, ready for the day's patrons. In this place, cleaning is about readiness, about making the space usable again, not erasing every trace of the past. Farther along, the communal bakehouse is already in motion. The oven's heat drives out the damp chill, and loaves are lined up in neat rows on wooden boards. Between bakes, the baker scrapes the floor of the oven, pushing the ashes into a bucket. This small act, removing the visible debris, is what keeps the bread from tasting of smoke. It's not the sterile environment you might expect in your own time, but it's clean enough to keep the food wholesome by their standards. You make your way toward the river, where laundry day has begun for a group of women. They kneel on the bank, skirts tucked up, arms bare in the cool air. Soap made from animal fat and lye foams faintly in the water, and the sound of fabric being beaten against stones echoes along the shore. Here, hygiene becomes a communal event, a time for exchanging news as much as for removing dirt. Clothes are not washed daily or even weekly. This kind of work is done in bulk, and each garment will be worn many times before returning here. The sun will dry them, the wind will freshen them, and until the next wash that will be enough. Back in the town, the blacksmith hoses down his forge floor with water from a bucket, the steam rising in clouds. The heat of the fire keeps the space mostly dry, otherwise but the washing helps keep down the dust and ash. Like so many others here, his cleaning is targeted not for appearance, but for function. Too much ash underfoot makes the ground slippery, and a misplaced step near the forge can mean disaster. At the edge of the square, you notice the herb seller arranging bundles of fresh cuttings. Sage, rosemary, mint. They're not just for flavoring food. Customers buy them to hang in doorways, to toss into wash water, or to carry as talismans against disease. The air around her stall smells green and sharp, and in this moment, you can see how scent is one of the past's most trusted tools of hygiene. If it smells fresh, it must be fresh. That's the belief that shapes so many small acts here. By late morning, the streets have settled into their familiar rhythm again, sweeping, rinsing, arranging, mending. None of it will keep the town pristine, but it will hold chaos at bay for another day. You realize that in this world, cleaning isn't a destination. It's a constant loop, a conversation between people and their surroundings that never really ends. Every basin of water, every sweep of the broom, every bunch of herbs hung in a window is a quiet declaration that life here is worth tending even if it's never spotless. And as you stand in the square, watching these rituals repeat themselves, you can't help but think that the people here might understand something that's been forgotten in your own time, that cleanliness is not about erasing the signs of living, but about shaping them into something you can live with. The afternoon light stretches long shadows across the streets, and the pace of the town eases into that slower rhythm that comes between the midday bustle and the evening meal. You follow the slope of the road toward the gardens and small fields just outside the walls where people tend the green spaces that feed them. Here, hygiene takes yet another form, the careful management of the land, the crops and the tools that make survival possible. A farmer stands at the edge of a plot cleaning soil from the blade of his hoe with a strip of old cloth. He's not worried about the handle worn smooth by years of work, but the blade must be kept free of rust. That's his version of sanitation rooted in practicality. Across the way, a woman is shaking dried beans from their pods into a basket. She pauses to brush a bit of dust from her hands, then goes back to work without seeking out water. In this world, dirt is removed when it gets in the way, otherwise it's simply ignored. You wander to the edge of the moat where a group of children are filling small pails. They're collecting water for the household gardens, dipping from the cleaner side, far from the tannery drains. Even here, people have learned to read the signs. Water that looks or smells wrong is avoided even if they don't know exactly why. This instinctive separation of usable and dangerous resources is one of the quiet, constant acts of hygiene that keeps the community alive. Moving back inside the walls, you pass the home of a weaver. She is beating the dust from a length of newly finished cloth, sending tiny motes spinning into the sunlight. The cloth will be aired before it's cut into garments, not just to freshen it, but to let any lingering smells of dye and oil fade away. Fabric carries the sense of where it's been sheep's wool, still faintly smelling of the animal linen, remembering the water it was retted in. And in this world, part of cleaning is allowing time and air to do the work. Farther along, a brewer is rinsing barrels with scalding water, the steam rolling out into the street. This is one of the rare times when truly hot water is used in abundance because a spoiled batch of ale can't be undone. The barrels are scrubbed with coarse brushes, rinsed again, and left open to dry before being filled. For the brewer, cleanliness is an investment. Every slip in standards risks his reputation and his livelihood. You notice how much of this world's hygiene is tied to skill and trade. The tanner, the brewer, the baker, the smith. Each has a version of clean tailored to their work. It's not about killing invisible germs. It's about preserving the integrity of the product and the trust of those who buy it. The body comes second, if at all. A smith might go home streaked with soot, a baker dusted in flour, a tanner smelling of hides, and no one sees these as marks of poor hygiene. They're badges of profession worn proudly. Near the main street, a midwife's home catches your eye. She's outside rinsing her hands in a basin, scrubbing with soap, real good quality soap, before tending to a woman inside. This is one of the rare moments when personal cleanliness is taken seriously, and for reasons beyond appearance. Midwives, healers, and barbers all understand, at least in part, that dirt can be dangerous in their work. They may not know the science, but they've seen the consequences of unwashed hands or dirty tools. For them, cleanliness is not just a habit, it's a safeguard. As the sun begins to lower, the streets grow quieter again. People are finishing their outside tasks, pulling in laundry from lines, storing tools, and sweeping thresholds. These last sweeps aren't meant to banish every speck of dirt. They're a signal that the day's work is over. The dirt that remains will wait for morning. You pause at a corner to watch a man toss a bucket of gray water into the gutter, the liquid winding its way toward the drain. It's the same sight you've seen countless times now, but it feels different in the warm gold light. You understand finally that this endless movement of water broom and hand is not about achieving perfection. It's about keeping the balance between the inevitable dirt of living and the level of order a community needs to keep going. The air cools as the last light fades, carrying the smell of baking bread and roasting meat. Somewhere a child's laughter rings out. Somewhere else a broom makes one last scratch over stone. The day is ending, but the cycle of work, of dirt, of cleaning will begin again tomorrow, just as it has for centuries. And here in this rhythm is where the past's idea of hygiene truly lives. The last light of the day slips away, and the town exhales into night. You walk slowly now, retracing your steps through streets that have quieted to a low murmur. Candles flicker in windows, their glow softening the hard edges of stone and timber. The air is heavier in the cool dark, scented with smoke, bread cooling on boards, and the faint tang of the gutter water as it winds unseen through the shadows. You've come to know these smells not as threats, not even as comforts, but as constants, as much a part of life here as the toll of the church bell or the creak of the well rope. You pass a home where a woman is folding laundry, each piece carefully stacked on a bench. These clothes have been washed in the river earlier in the week, and though the fabric holds a trace of ash soap, it's not the crisp, perfumed freshness, you know. Still to her, they are clean, ready to be worn again until the next wash day comes. Cleanliness here is not a fleeting moment of perfection. It's an earned state held onto as long as possible before the slow creep of daily life demands the process start again. At the next corner, a man is oiling the leather straps of his harness by lamplight. He works slowly, rubbing the oil in with calloused fingers, making sure the leather stays strong and supple. This too is hygiene not for the body, but for the tools and goods that sustain life. In this world, the care of objects and the care of oneself are often inseparable. Both are about maintenance, prevention, and respect for what keeps you alive. You stop at the tavern where a few late drinkers linger over their mugs. The innkeeper wipes the wooden tables with a damp rag between customers, not to make them spotless, but to keep them usable. The floor is sprinkled with fresh rushes that crunch softly underfoot, covering the older layer beneath. It's a trick you've seen everywhere. Don't remove the dirt cover. Mask it. Keep it in its place. Leaving the tavern behind, you wander down a quieter lane toward the town wall. A pair of night soil men shuffle past with their loads heading for the outskirts. The work is thankless, but without it, life inside these walls would grind to a halt under its own waste. Their task is a stark reminder that hygiene here is often about the unseen, the unspoken, the things that must be managed so that others don't have to think about them. Near the gate, you find a watchman standing guard, his cloak wrapped tightly against the chill. He smells faintly of smoke and leather, the scents of the guardhouse and his gear. His boots are worn but well cared for, polished, not for appearance but for protection against the wet. Even in his quiet vigil, you can see the same pattern you've seen all day: care where it matters, acceptance where it doesn't. Beyond the gate, the land stretches out in darkness, dotted with the faint lights of cottages and farms. Out there, the same routines are happening: water-fetched tools, cleaned floors, swept faces, wiped bedding, shaken. The same balance between dirt and order, the same quiet resilience. As you turn back toward the heart of the town, the bells toll softly in the distance, marking the hour. You've walked through every part of this place, seen how its people live, work, and care for themselves, in a world without your modern standards or tools. And you realize now that the question of how hygienic people were in the past has no single answer. By your standards, they were never truly clean. By theirs, they were clean enough to survive, to endure, to carry life forward another day. In the end, hygiene here isn't about perfection. It's about persistence, the daily acts, however small, that keep the balance from tipping. It's about knowing what must be tended to, what can be endured, and what will always return no matter how hard you scrub. And in that sense, it's timeless. Because even in your own world, in all its sterility and scentless soaps, you are still part of that same ancient rhythm.